The call came at 10:45 a.m. I know this because my computer clock, a monument to digital precision, was mocking me with the 15 minutes I had left before the district-wide tornado drill commenced. 15 minutes before I'd have to listen to a pre-recorded message of calm, authoritative doom broadcast across every school, reminding children that their best defense against a 200-mile-per-hour vortex of airborne debris was to crouch under a desk made of particle board and hope for the best. My phone, an extension of my very soul that buzzed with the anxieties of 1,000 teachers, lit up with a familiar name. Dr. Albright, Northwood Elementary. I answered with the practiced weariness of a man who solved technological crises for a living. Senior Field Technician Leo Maxwell speaking, I said, my voice a carefully cultivated blend of I can help you and I have seen the abyss and it has a blinking cursor. Let me guess. The library printer is demanding a sacrifice of magenta ink again? Leo, thank God, she said, her voice tight with a panic that was several notches above the usual. The projector won't turn on level. We have a problem, a big one. I leaned forward, the springs of my government-issued chair groaning in protest. Define big. The PA system is completely dead, she said, the words tumbling out. The bells, the intercom, the emergency broadcast, everything. I can't make any announcements. I went cold. In the ecosystem of a school, the public address system is the apex predator. It's the voice of God. It doesn't just chime for recess. It screams for fire drills. It whispers for lockdowns. It broadcasts Amber Alerts. It is the school's central nervous system, and Dr. Albright had just told me it had suffered a massive, catastrophic stroke. Dead how? I asked, my own voice now sharp, stripped of its lazy sarcasm. Like, no power? Did someone trip a breaker? No hum, no static, nothing. It's a ghost, Leo, and the drill is in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The gears in my head, rusted from years of dealing with password resets and pop-up ads, started to grind into motion. This wasn't a software glitch. This was a hardware apocalypse. Don't do anything, don't touch anything, I'm on my way, I said, already grabbing my tool bag. It was a battered canvas satchel filled with everything from delicate fiber optic splicers to a hammer, for when subtlety failed, which it often did. As I flew out of the district office, leaving a half-eaten donut and a sea of unresolved IT tickets in my wake, my mind wasn't just on the dead PA system. My mind was a split screen of catastrophes. On one side, the impending safety drill failure at Northwood. On the other, a gaping, cavernous hole in my own house where a bathroom used to be. My home, my supposed castle, was currently under siege by a one-man barbarian horde named Gus. Gus was my contractor. He was a man of few words and many grim discoveries, each of which cost me a portion of my sanity and a significant chunk of my retirement savings. Just this morning, he had greeted me with the kind of deadpan solemnity usually reserved for informing next of kin. "Mornin'," he'd grunted, his shadow falling over my makeshift coffee station on the kitchen counter. "Found something." "Please, Gus," I'd begged, not looking up from my cereal. "For the love of all that is holy, tell me you found a stash of gold bars hidden in the walls by a Prohibition-era gangster." He'd stared at me for a long moment, his expression unchanging. "Knob and tube." "I'm sorry, I don't speak ancient curses. What is that?" "It's wiring," he explained, with the patience of a man describing an alien artifact. "From back when they thought fire was just a fun, bright way to light up a room. Means the whole house needs a rewire. Insurance won't touch it otherwise." So, as I took a corner in my white work van a little faster than the law recommended, my baseline stress level was already hovering somewhere near air traffic controller during a blizzard. A dead PA system was just the cherry on top of a very expensive, very flammable cake. My thoughts drifted to my last conversation with Dr. Albright, just a few days ago. She'd been holding a file thick enough to stop a bullet, her face a mask of weary frustration. "It's the new HOA president," she'd sighed, pushing the file across her desk towards me. "Brenda Kravitz, from Evergreen Estates, right over the fence." I'd flipped through it. The complaints were a masterwork of suburban grievance. The color of the new playground kickball was a distractingly vibrant. A delivery truck had allegedly idled for an ecologically criminal 4 minutes. But her main obsession, her Moby Dick, was the school bell. She says the specific frequency of the chime is causing psychic unrest in her begonias, Dr. Albright had said, without a trace of irony. She was long past finding it funny. "It's in writing. She's demanding we silence it." "It's a bell," I'd said, baffled. "It tells kids they're late. It's been doing that job since the invention of childhood." Now, peeling into the Northwood Elementary parking lot, the two halves of my brain slammed together. The vendetta against the bell. The suddenly, completely dead PA system. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a random act of God. This was an act of Karen. I burst through the school's main doors and was hit by the familiar wall of sound and smell. The high-pitched chatter of children, the scent of industrial floor wax, pencil shavings, and that faint, unidentifiable aroma of lukewarm milk. Dr. Albright met me in the hall, her face pale. She led me not to her office, but down a narrow corridor to a small door marked Utility Closet. "It's in here," she whispered, as if we were entering a tomb. The closet was the school's nerve center, a cramped space filled with the quiet hum of electronics. At its heart was the comms rack, a metal tower blinking with a constellation of tiny green lights. All except for one. The main brain, the PA 1500 public address controller, was dark. Its screen was blank. It was a brick. "Okay, let's see the patient," I muttered, dropping my bag. I ran through the checklist. Power supply, green light, breakers, all flipped on. I plugged my diagnostic laptop into its service port. Nothing. The machine was completely unresponsive. It was like trying to talk to a rock. "This doesn't make sense," I said, more to myself than to Dr. Albright, who was hovering in the doorway like a nervous ghost. A total failure like this with no power surge? The internal battery should have at least kept the error log alive. My eyes traced the thick, sheathed trunk line that fed the system. The main artery that carried audio and command signals throughout the building. It ran from the rack, through a conduit, and into the wall, heading for an external junction box on the building's north side. The side that faced the pristine, manicured lawns of Evergreen Estates. "Show me where this cable goes outside," I said. We hurried out a side door into the bright morning sun. The junction box was halfway up the brick wall, a boring gray metal square. Or it was supposed to be. The cover was slightly ajar. I pulled out my multi-tool and undid the screws. The moment I swung the metal door open, I saw it. The main trunk line, a cable as thick as my thumb, had been cut. It wasn't a frayed wire or a break from age. This was a deliberate, clean snip. The copper wires inside splayed out like a macabre flower. You could practically see the indentation from the jaws of a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. I stood there for a second, looking at the severed ends of the cable. Then at the perfectly trimmed hedge that marked the property line of Brenda Kravitz's domain. The clock in my head was screaming. It was 10:52 a.m., 8 minutes until the tornado drill. "Son of a—" I bit the word off. Dr. Albright gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Someone did this?" she stammered. "Oh yeah," I said, a cold, furious certainty washing over me. "Someone did this. The psychic unrest in the begonias just escalated to domestic terrorism." I pulled out my phone. But we have a bigger problem. 8 minutes. My first call was the one I was legally obligated to make. My boss, a man whose official title was District Facilities Manager, but who I privately called the Keeper of the Forms. I explained the situation in clipped, urgent tones. Vandalism, severed emergency line, impending district-wide drill. His response was a masterclass in bureaucratic detachment. "Okay, Leo," he said, his voice calm and maddeningly slow. "First thing you need to do is initiate the emergency procurement protocol. That's Form 7B. Fill it out, detail the damage. Then you'll need to get 3 separate quotes from our list of approved vendors." "3 quotes?" I nearly screamed into the phone. "The drill is in 7 minutes. A real tornado wouldn't wait for me to get 3 quotes. "Rules are rules, Leo," he said, and I could practically hear him shrugging through the phone. "We have procedures. Fill out the 7B, submit a preliminary incident report, that's the 9, C, and email it to purchasing. They'll put a rush on it." "What's a rush?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. 3 to 5 business days. I ended the call. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even make a sound. I just pressed the red icon on my screen and stared at the phone in my hand, feeling a wave of pure, unadulterated rage wash over me. 3 to 5 business days. The paperwork for failure to warn children of impending doom would probably take longer than that to clear. And then, through the red mist of fury, a thought appeared. A glorious, beautiful, highly illegal thought. Decommissioned surplus. Last year, the middle school got a full tech overhaul. Their old PA system, an ugly but functional beige box from the late 90s, was hauled off to the district warehouse. I knew because I was the one who hauled it. It was sitting on a dusty shelf in purgatory, waiting for an auction that would never come. The district warehouse was 3 blocks away. I looked at Dr. Albright. Her face was a portrait of despair. "They want me to fill out a form," I told her. Her shoulders slumped. "Oh dear." "Yeah," I said, a wild grin spreading across my face. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call the police and report this vandalism. Legally, you have to. While you're doing that, I'm going to go commit several violations of district policy. Don't wait for me." Before she could process what I'd said, I was sprinting back to my van. The drive to the warehouse was a blur. I have a vague memory of laying on the horn and treating stop signs as gentle suggestions. My van, usually a placid beast of burden, screeched around corners, its racks of spare parts clattering like a cheap skeleton in a windstorm. My internal monologue was a frantic chant. Don't think about the paperwork. Don't think about your boss. Don't think about Gus finding a family of badgers living in your chimney. I skidded to a halt in front of the warehouse, a vast, windowless brick monolith that smelled of old paper and forgotten futures. My master key slid into the lock, and I heaved the heavy metal door open. The district warehouse is where school equipment goes to die. It's a mausoleum of metal and plastic, arranged in towering shelves that disappear into the dusty gloom. I flicked on the lights, revealing aisles of silent, forgotten objects. Legions of tiny wooden chairs, stacks of textbooks from the 90s, proclaiming Pluto was still a planet. A forlorn-looking row of disemboweled CRT monitors. It was a monument to the phrase, "We might need this someday." For the first time in the history of institutional hoarding, that day had actually come. "Aisle 7, audiovisual, decommissioned," I muttered, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. I ran, my footsteps clanging on the concrete floor. I passed shelves of overhead projectors, slide carousels, and VCRs that probably still had tapes of Bill Nye the Science Guy inside. And then I saw it. On a high shelf, nestled between a box of broken cassette players and a film strip projector, was the PA 2000 public address controller. It was a beige box, the size of a microwave, heavy, ugly, and in that moment the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I scrambled up the rolling ladder, heaved it onto my shoulder, it weighed a ton, and scrambled back down. I was back in the van peeling out of the lot by 10:56 a.m. When I got back to the school, Dr. Albright was on the phone, presumably with the police dispatch, her voice trembling. I didn't stop. I ran straight to the junction box. The heavy PA 2000 cradled in my arms like a ridiculous rectangular baby. The clock was ticking. 10:57 a.m. This was the moment. The point where careful planning and procedure go out the window and you're left with nothing but instinct and a multi-tool. It was time for some high-stakes arts and crafts. I set the PA 2000 on the grass, ripped open its service panel, and got to work. My hands flew, driven by pure adrenaline. The cut trunk line had dozens of tiny color-coded wires inside. The new box had a different connection interface. It wasn't plug and play, it was strip and pray. I didn't have my professional wire strippers. I used my teeth, tearing the plastic sheathing off the tiny wires and spitting it onto the grass. Red to red, green to green, black to black. I twisted the copper filaments together, my fingers moving with a speed and precision I didn't know I possessed. Dr. Albright had finished her call and was now watching me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. I bypassed the main terminal block, jury-rigging the connections directly to the controller's motherboard. Sparks flew. I ignored them. I used a roll of electrical tape from my bag to wrap the exposed connections, creating a monstrous lumpy knot of black tape and raw wires that would have made any electrical inspector weep. It was an abomination. It was a masterpiece. I slammed the service panel shut, looked at my watch. 10 hours, 59 minutes, and 45 seconds. Get ready, I grunted at Dr. Albright. I pulled out my phone, went to my contacts, and hit the speed dial number for the district's remote PA activation system. A computerized voice answered. Please enter your 7-digit activation code. I punched it in. Activation accepted. System test commencing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At precisely 11 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds a.m., the speakers mounted on the roof of Northwood Elementary, silent for the last hour, erupted with life. Boonk! Boonk! This is a drill. This is a district-wide tornado drill. Please proceed calmly to your designated shelter areas. This is a drill. The sound was terrible. The old PA 2000 had a tinny, distorted quality, like a robot shouting through a tin can. But it was loud. It was clear. It was working. Inside the school, I could hear the familiar, orderly shuffling of hundreds of small feet as teachers guided their classes into the hallways. I slumped against the brick wall, my heart hammering against my ribs, my hands shaking. I was covered in sweat and grime. I had saved the day. I had also just created a paperwork nightmare that would likely follow me to my grave. In that moment, I didn't care. I was a hero. I was a god of wires and beige boxes. Dr. Albright was staring at me, her mouth agape. How did you do that? I violated approximately 17 different district policies, I said, panting. But, you know, for the children. The moment of triumph lasted for about 90 seconds. That's when I saw her, striding across the perfectly manicured lawn that separated her kingdom from the school, her face a mask of righteous fury, was Brenda Kravitz. She was dressed in expensive pink athleisure wear, a white visor perched on her immaculately coiffed hair. She hadn't seen the open junction box. She hadn't seen my Frankenstein's monster of a PA controller sitting on the grass. All she heard was the noise she had gone to such great lengths to silence. She marched right up to us, planting her hands on her hips. "Excuse me," she barked. her voice cutting through the air like a power saw. "Are you the one responsible for this racket? I thought I made it abundantly clear in my official correspondence that this level of noise pollution is completely unacceptable." I stared at her. The sheer, unmitigated gall was breathtaking. It was like watching a bank robber return to the scene of the crime to complain that the vault door had been left open, creating a draft. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't get me fired or arrested, Dr. Albright, now emboldened by our miraculous success, stepped forward. "Actually, Mrs. Kravitz," she said, her voice dripping with newfound steel, "the police are on their way. We had to report an act of vandalism." She pointed a trembling but determined finger at the open junction box and the severed cable dangling from it. Brenda Kravitz followed her finger. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her tanned, expensive face. For the first time, she seemed to notice the ugly beige box at my feet and the tangle of wires that looked like an exploded squid. She was caught, and she knew it. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. It was a deeply satisfying sight. That's when the squad car rolled silently up the service road and came to a stop beside us. The doors opened, and out stepped two police officers, a perfect yin and yang of law enforcement. The first was Officer Miller, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a magnificent mustache that seemed to carry the weight of all the world's disappointments. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who was paid by the hour and had no intention of rushing things. The second was Officer Davis, young, bright-eyed, and radiating an almost painful earnestness. He had his notepad out before his second foot hit the pavement. "All right," Officer Miller said, his voice a low rumble. "Dispatch said something about vandalism to school property." The scene that followed was a symphony of suburban absurdity. Dr. Albright, the calm and professional victim, explained what had happened. Brenda, recovering with astonishing speed, immediately shifted into full-blown offensive mode, claiming she was the real victim, that the school was harassing her with its sonic assaults, and that this was clearly a desperate attempt to frame her and silence her legitimate protests. Officer Davis, the rookie, took it all in with deadly seriousness, scribbling furiously in his notepad. "So, ma'am," he said to Brenda, his pen poised, "can you please account for your whereabouts between approximately 1000 and 10:30 hours this morning?" Brenda puffed out her chest. "I was in my garden, tending to my prize-winning petunias, which I might add have been suffering from severe anxiety due to the constant sonic vibrations from this institution." I couldn't help myself. I leaned over to Officer Miller, who was examining the cut cable with a look of profound boredom. "Her petunias have an alibi," I murmured. "Smart." Miller's mustache twitched, the barest hint of a smile. He ignored me. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, his voice flat, "did you see anyone near this box this morning? Anyone at all?" "I am the victim here," she shrieked, pointing a finger at me. "This man is clearly performing some kind of unauthorized and frankly dangerous-looking electrical work. He's probably the one who did it, to justify his own job." It was at that precise, perfect moment of peak chaos that my phone rang. The screen flashed a name that sent a jolt of dread through my already overloaded system. Gus, the contractor. I held up a hand. "Sorry, I have to take this. It's an emergency of a different, more expensive nature." I stepped away. "Gus, now is not a great time," I said into the phone. "The subfloor in the bathroom is rotten." Gus's voice grunted, devoid of any emotion. "Looks like a slow leak was happening for about 10 years. The whole thing's gotta come out." I closed my eyes. Of course it was. In the grand opera of my life, this was just another tragic aria. "Fine, Gus," I sighed. "Add it to the bill. The bill's name is Misery. It's a running tab. I hung up and returned to the drama. Officer Davis was trying to get a straight answer out of Brenda, who was now weaving a complex conspiracy theory involving the school board, the PTA, and possibly big kickball. Officer Miller, meanwhile, was squatting down, his eyes scanning the grass around the junction box. He wasn't looking at the box. He was looking at the ground where Brenda had been standing when she first accosted us. He had the sharp, practiced eyes of a man who had seen 1,000 crime scenes, most of them involving petty disputes over fences and barking dogs. And then he stopped. While Davis was asking Brenda to spell the word petunia, Miller was looking at something glinting in the grass. It was tiny, a little piece of colored plastic, red to be exact. It was the kind of disposable plastic blade guard that comes on a new pair of high-end gardening shears, the kind my own mother had, the kind a woman with prize-winning petunias would almost certainly own. Brenda had brought the murder weapon to the crime scene, committed the crime, and then left behind a tiny, damning piece of evidence before returning to complain about the noise. It was a level of stupidity so profound it was almost a work of art. Miller subtly poked it with the end of his pen. He looked up, and our eyes met. He gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent, man-to-man acknowledgement of the cosmic absurdity we were witnessing. The investigation was over before it had even really begun. They had no confession, no weapon, but they had a motive as big as a billboard, and now a crucial piece of circumstantial evidence. Miller stood up, brushing off his knees. "Okay, folks," he said, his voice carrying a note of finality. "I think we have what we need for now." He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, we'd appreciate it if you'd stay available for further questions." Brenda, oblivious to the tiny red clue that sealed her fate, stormed off toward her house, vowing to contact her lawyer, the mayor, and her congressman. I was left standing next to my beautiful, ugly, highly illegal technical masterpiece, the tinny sound of the tornado drill finally winding down. The immediate crisis was over. But I had a sinking feeling that the war was just beginning. A few days later, my feeling was confirmed. Brenda, realizing she was the prime suspect in a police investigation, had decided that the best defense was a good offense, a PR offensive. I was at my desk, trying to close the 57 new IT tickets that had spawned in my absence, when a coworker forwarded me a link to the local community Facebook group. The post was from Brenda Kravitz. It was a petition on change.org. "Stop Northwood Elementary's acoustic assault on our neighborhood." The description was a work of pure fiction, a dramatic tale of a lone citizen fighting against a cold, unfeeling bureaucracy. She claimed the school's archaic and deafeningly loud bell system was a violation of her human rights, causing auditory distress and emotional trauma to the residents of Evergreen Estates. There was no mention of emergency drills or safety systems. It was all about the bells. Her bells. The post had over 200 likes and dozens of comments. "You go, Brenda." "It's about time someone stood up to them." "The noise is terrible. It's lowering our property values." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. She was reframing her act of vandalism as a noble act of civil disobedience. But it got worse. A local news blog, the kind that usually reports on lost cats and new smoothie shops, had picked up the story. The headline was plastered across their homepage. "Local homeowner fights back against bully school district." And there she was, a professionally shot photograph of Brenda Kravitz, standing in her pristine garden, a look of profound anguish on her face. She was holding a wilting petunia in one hand and pointing an accusatory finger towards the distant, out-of-focus school building. She looked like a saint contemplating her martyrdom. I read the article, my stomach churning. It quoted her extensively, painting her as a gentle soul whose tranquil life had been shattered by the school's constant, percussive sonic attacks. My 3-minute, life-saving miracle fix was described as a hastily assembled and potentially hazardous device installed without proper oversight. My own name was mentioned as the district employee at the center of the controversy. She'd weaponized victimhood. In the suburban coliseum, the woman holding the wilting flower always had the upper hand, even if she'd used her gardening shears to cut a vital emergency cable just a few days prior. My desk phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, an internal line from the district's main administrative building, the Ivory Tower, as we called it. "Mr. Maxwell," a crisp professional voice asked. "Please hold for Superintendent Davies." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I was no longer Leo Maxwell, senior field technician. I was now Leo Maxwell, the guy at the center of the controversy. I was being summoned to the principal's office. The big principal. The office of Superintendent Davies was on the top floor of the district administration building. It was a world away from the dusty utility closets and noisy cafeterias I called my natural habitat. The carpet was thick enough to swallow a small child. The walls were adorned with bland corporate art, and the air smelled of money and weak coffee. Davies himself was a political animal in his native environment. He was all polished shoes, a perfectly tailored suit, and a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. On his vast mahogany desk, positioned like a piece of evidence at a trial, was a printout of the news article featuring Saint Brenda of the Begonias. Next to it was my own incident report, the one detailing the unauthorized emergency requisition and installation of decommissioned hardware. "Leo," he said, gesturing to a chair that was far too comfortable to be trusted. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Translation: "Get in here, you're in trouble." "I've been reading about your eventful Tuesday," he continued, tapping the news article. "I've been reading it too," I said. "It's a gripping work of fiction. She has a real future as a novelist if the whole HOA tyrant thing doesn't work out." Davies's smile tightened by a millimeter. He wasn't amused. He wasn't concerned about the vandalism. He wasn't proud of my quick thinking. He was concerned about the optics. He saw the situation not in terms of right and wrong, but in terms of good and bad press. Right now, we were getting bad press. "Leo, I appreciate your initiative. I do," he said, leaning forward and steepling his fingers. "But we have procedures, protocols. You understand that. You can't just go rogue and install unapproved, uninventoried, non-compliant hardware onto school property. Do you have any idea the kind of liability you've exposed this district to?" Translation: "You made me look bad, and my primary concern is covering my own administrative backside." I met his gaze. "With all due respect, sir, the liability of a non-functional emergency system during a district-wide tornado drill felt a little more pressing at the time. The paperwork for preventable death of a 5th grader due to bureaucratic inertia is, I assume, quite extensive." A flash of genuine anger crossed his face before being immediately suppressed. I had hit a nerve. "Your point is taken," he said stiffly. "Nevertheless, this situation has spun out of control. This woman, this Mrs. Kravitz, is framing this as a David and Goliath story. We are Goliath, and you, with your unorthodox methods, have handed her a sling and a whole pile of rocks." He told me to lay low. The district's legal team was assessing the situation. The PR department was formulating a response. He implied, in no uncertain terms, that if this story got any bigger, a head would have to roll, and the head of the guy who installed the janky, non-compliant PA system was the most convenient one to place on the chopping block. I walked out of his office feeling like I'd just been hugged by a python. I had saved the day, and my reward was to be positioned as the fall guy. That evening, I was home, standing over my kitchen sink eating lukewarm Chinese takeout from a carton. My dining room table was buried under sheets of drywall. The air smelled of paint fumes and my own despair. The A-plot of my life had officially merged with the B-plot to create one giant, unmitigated disaster. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Gus. I was almost afraid to look. Gus, found asbestos in the insulation around the pipes. Got to call in the abatement team. I typed back a single, weary word. Okay. Of course my house had asbestos. It was probably haunted, too. At this point, I'd be disappointed if my 1970s bungalow wasn't actively trying to kill me in a variety of creative and expensive ways. As if on cue, an email pinged on my phone. The subject line made my blood run cold. Subject, Notice of Emergency Town Hall. Meeting, Evergreen Estates HOA. I opened it. The HOA was calling a community-wide meeting to be held in their clubhouse in 2 days. The topic? To address the ongoing safety and noise concerns posed by Northwood Elementary and demand action from the school district. The email went on to say that the school district had been formally invited to send a representative to listen to the community's concerns and answer questions. The final paragraph was the kill shot. Superintendent Davies has confirmed that Mr. Leo Maxwell, the district's senior field technician and the individual responsible for the recent controversial installation, will be in attendance to represent the district and address the issues raised. I was being thrown to the wolves, the well-dressed, Chardonnay-sipping, passive-aggressive wolves of the suburbs. Davies wasn't just throwing me under the bus, he was driving the bus, and he'd hired Brenda to sell tickets and hand out programs. The community clubhouse of Evergreen Estates was exactly as I'd imagined it, a symphony of beige, with tasteful generic art on the walls and a faint scent of potpourri and righteous indignation in the air. It was packed. Every seat was filled with the concerned, khaki-clad citizens of Brenda's kingdom. In the back, a cameraman from the local news channel was setting up his tripod. Brenda was at a podium at the front, finishing a masterful, tear-filled performance. She clutched a tissue in one hand. She recounted her heroic struggle against the unfeeling, monolithic school district. She spoke of her reasonable requests being ignored, of her anxiety, of her fear for the community's property values. She never once mentioned cutting a cable. She just painted a picture of herself as a Joan of Arc, fighting for the sacred right to quiet enjoyment. All we ask, she concluded, her voice cracking with emotion, is for a little peace, a little consideration. Is that too much to ask? The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. People were nodding, murmuring their support. Some were even giving her a standing ovation. Superintendent Davies and Dr. Albright were sitting in the front row, looking as grim as pallbearers. The moderator, a man with a comb-over and a blazer, stepped up to the microphone. Thank you, Brenda, for so bravely sharing your story. I'd now like to ask if the representative from the school district would like to respond. Davies, the coward, didn't move. He simply turned his head slightly and gestured with his chin towards the back of the room. Towards me. Every head in the room turned. 100 pairs of eyes landed on me, the designated villain of the evening. I was wearing my work polo and jeans. I hadn't had time to change. I looked like what I was, a technician who had stumbled into a political execution. My execution. There was nothing to do but walk. I made my way down the center aisle, the angry murmurs of the crowd following me like a swarm of bees. I didn't go to the podium. That was her stage. I just stopped in the open space in front of the first row, turning to face the audience. In my hand, I was holding a prop, the thick, black cable I had removed from the junction box, its cleanly severed ends visible to everyone. I held it up. The room quieted. Good evening, I said. My voice wasn't polished like Brenda's, but it was steady, and it carried in the silent room. My name is Leo Maxwell. I'm the district's senior field technician. I'm the guy who fixed the PA system. I paused, letting them look at me. at the cable. "This is the part that was broken," I said simply. Mrs. Kravitz is right about one thing. The school is loud. It can be. But she seems to be confused about what this system is for. She talks a lot about the bells. Let me tell you what I hear when I think about that system. I took a breath. I hear the fire alarm that gets over 300 kids and 24 staff members out of that building in under 2 minutes. I hear the lockdown alert that tells a teacher to lock her door, to hide her students in a corner, because there might be a dangerous person on the grounds. I hear the announcement that a kindergartner's mom is waiting for him at the office because he's sick, or that a little girl has lost her lunchbox and is crying in the yard. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the faces staring back at me. Their expressions were starting to change, shifting from hostility to confusion. "And yes," I continued, my voice getting stronger, "I hear the tornado drill, that loud, annoying noise you all hate so much. That's the sound of us practicing how to save lives. Because a few years ago, a town not 30 miles from here didn't get that warning in time. A school was hit. The system you're complaining about isn't for Brenda's petunias. It's for them." I gestured towards Dr. Albright, who was looking at me with tears in her eyes. I held the severed cable up higher. On Tuesday morning, just minutes before a district-wide safety drill, someone took a pair of cutters and deliberately severed this line. Someone decided that their personal peace and quiet was more important than the safety of every single child and adult in that building. I don't know who did it. I glanced at Brenda, whose face had gone from triumphant to ashen white. But I know what I did. When I got the call, I didn't fill out a form. I didn't wait for 3 quotes. I fixed it. I found an old, ugly box in a dusty warehouse, and I jerry-rigged it into place because I didn't have 3 to 5 business days. I had 3 minutes, and I would do it again every single time. I finished. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a thick, heavy blanket of stunned comprehension. The narrative had been shattered. I hadn't called Brenda a criminal. I didn't have to. I had simply explained the stakes. I had shown them the reality behind their petty grievances. The HOA members were no longer looking at Brenda with sympathy. They were looking at her with dawning, horrified understanding. They were parents and grandparents. They understood what a lockdown was. They understood what a tornado was. And they finally understood what she had done. The meeting fell apart. The moderator tried to regain control, but it was useless. The news reporter, smelling blood in the water, was now peppering a flustered, stammering Brenda with sharp questions. Her own neighbors were turning their backs on her, whispering amongst themselves. I felt a presence beside me. It was Officer Miller, who had been standing in the back of the room the whole time. "Maxwell," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That was quite the speech." "Just telling them what the wires do," I said, my adrenaline starting to fade. "Right," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He lowered his voice. "By the way, the lab got a match on that plastic blade cover we found. It's from a specific brand of shears sold exclusively at the Home Depot on 5th Street. We pulled the store's security footage from last weekend. Funny thing." My heart skipped a beat. "Don't tell me," I said. "A woman in a visor and expensive yoga pants bought some prize-winning petunia food and a new pair of heavy-duty, cable-ready shears." Miller's mustache twitched in confirmation. "Funny thing," he repeated. He gave me a slow nod, a gesture of respect from one tired, overworked public servant to another, and walked away. Superintendent Davies appeared at my elbow, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. He'd seen the room turn. He knew which way the political wind was now blowing. "Maxwell," he said, clapping a clammy hand on my shoulder. "Good, decisive work. A bit unorthodox, but you showed real leadership tonight." I just looked at him. I didn't say a word. It was a hollow victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. I drove home in a daze. When I walked into my house, the acrid smell of paint was gone. The drywall sheets were gone. The chaos was gone. On the newly installed kitchen island, there was a note from Gus. "Rewire's done. Asbestos is gone. Bathroom is finished. Invoice is on the table. Don't call me for a week. Seriously." With a sense of trepidation and hope, I walked down the hall. I pushed open the door to what was once a gaping chasm of constructional despair. It was a bathroom. A real, honest-to-God bathroom. It had clean white tile, a new vanity with a gleaming faucet, and in the corner, shining like the Holy Grail, a brand new, perfectly functional toilet. I closed the door, locking it behind me. The silence was absolute. I sat down on my new porcelain throne, the undisputed king of my newly restored castle. I leaned my head back against the cool, freshly painted wall and let out a long, slow breath. The world was loud. It was full of Karens and bureaucrats, of asbestos and broken pipes, of noise and fury that signified nothing. But tonight, in my own quiet kingdom, I had a working toilet. I had won. And in the end, isn't that what every man really wants? A quiet place to sit down and enjoy the silence you've earned.